All right, we're back with our bonus presentation today. Um, Karen, Karen, I'm just going to let you introduce yourself
Sure,
since I
sure.
I don't know you personally and I don't know your background. And you can emphasize what you want emphasized rather than what your website emphasizes.
Thank you. Okay, so am I starting now?
Go ahead, yeah.
Okay, yes. Well, the past two presentations, Jesse and John's, they were so many deep resonances with what I'm here to do at the last minute through many synchronous shifts. We are living through a time of cataclysmic, mutational change. Lucky us, we're living in a Chinese curse. I think every one of the mutational changes that Gebser and Wilbur and others talked about, every one of those changes has been cataclysmic. Uh, Lucky us to be living through a really, really, really big one now. As I mentioned before, I came to Gebser through Ken Wilber. I began reading Wilbur's books in 1983 when I was still just finishing my PhD dissertation in cultural history. And I followed Wilbur's major writing ever since. A few years ago, I was finally lucky enough to connect with Jeremy Johnson, and I finally actually read Gebser's Ever Present Origin, taking Jeremy's course twice. I began this oddball essay I'm about to read to you before I'd read Gebser, but I mean, through Wilbur, I mean, it all meshes. So at this stage in my life, very briefly about myself, having been an academic, a meditation practitioner for 40 years, a homemaker and administrator, and a caregiver for elderly family members, I am reinventing myself yet again as a writer of visionary fiction. What I'm going to read to you now is an oddball experiment in visionary fiction. I've tried to imagine Gebser and Wilbur's eras of human culture from the point of view of an early farmer at the very beginning of the Neolithic. Hey, since all time is present all the time per Gebser, why not try? So as I read this, I will be speaking in the voice of a Stone Age priestess from 11,000 years ago, the time of the very first year-round farming communities, when this newfangled technology, farming, was changing everything, and mythic was only just beginning to emerge from magic for the first time. I imagine that the mutational changes those people went through were every bit as cataclysmic to them as the change of era we are experiencing now is to us. Every mutational change is cataclysmic. The breakdown, the buildup, the metabolism, there has to be a breaking down of old structures to release resources for new structures to form. But the people who live through those times tend to experience mostly the breaking down. And through this vision of this high priestess, we will go into my personal vision of a possible integral future. This is visionary. The reading will take about 45 minutes, 45 to 50 minutes. I'm warning you now. I'm not offended if people leave, but if any of you who stay onward, I'll be happy to stay on for any discussion if there's any stamina left at all. So this essay begins with a suitably portentous quote from Ken Wilber. And after I've read that, I will invite the voice of Mbe, High Priestess, to speak her vision to herself, to you today, through my person. So before I read the portentous Ken Wilber quote, I'd like to invite you to move and stretch again and wiggle, because we've been sitting a long time. And I will switch to my other file. Settle comfortably in our chairs. Here's the Wilber quote. Every realization of depth comes with a terrible burden. Those who are permitted to see are simultaneously saddled with the obligation to communicate that vision in no uncertain terms. That was the bargain. And that's from Ken Wilber's book, One Taste. So now, by way of allowing Embe, High Priestess from 11,000 years ago, to come up. I'm going to do a simple breathing exercise, and I invite anyone who wishes to join me. It's optional, but this is a very basic breathing exercise. So if we want to sit comfortably in our chairs, preferably upright spine, feet on the floor, but whatever works. Eyes can be open or shut. And we simply place our attention on this breath in this moment, in this embodied spirituality, embodied consciousness. Unplug our attention from any passing thought and be aware of how this breath feels in this moment, in this body. Simply witness the breath. How does this in-breath feel on the back of my throat? How does the out-breath feel? Is my belly expanding with the breath, or my chest? Simply witness each breath arrive on its own, as we would witness a wave washing up on the beach. Simply witness each out-breath leave us on its own, as we witness each wave recede from its high mark on the beach. And as we all breathe like this a few more times, I will invite Embe to speak through me. And when next you hear my voice, it will be her speaking. I know I will die in 2 days. I know where and how and who will drive the knife blade into my heart as the full moon rises. This is not why I tremble. I tremble for you, my people. What will become of you? I pray that you will catch the story my spirit is struggling to tell and heed my warning before my last breath leaves my body. 16 long years ago, you made me your high priestess. As we have gone forward together in our great change from foraging to farming, I have served our new gods by loving and serving you. You in turn have loved and supported me until now. In this latest crisis, you have turned on me. I cannot blame you for your bewilderment. Our great change has not been easy. At times, some of you have doubted, yearning to return to the days when we roamed in small bands on the bosom of the earth, our mother. Some among you have feared all along that our ancient spirits would curse us for leaving our old life ways. Still, until now, we had always endured in the face of every challenge, even through the troubles of these latest years, drought and roaming bands of displaced tribes and unrest here in town. But when the shadow of the earth fell upon our last full moon and darkened her face to blood, you, my people, despaired. "A monster is eating the moon," one of you cried. Within a heartbeat, many of you flared in fright and took up the cry. The demons of terror and chaos spread like wildfire among you. A few cried out that the ancient spirits of the land had risen against us and cursed us at last. This fear, too, spread quickly. Very soon I gave up trying to calm you with words alone. Instead, I led you in songs and dances. You thought these were to strengthen the moon in her struggle against the demon that was devouring it as the snake swallows an egg. And that was true in its way. But the songs and dances I gave you were also an outlet for your frenzy, so you would not go out of your minds with terror. I helped you pace yourselves to keep dancing and singing for nearly half the night until the moon came back again in her fullness. Then I helped you tell yourselves that your valor had vanquished the demon, as indeed it had. But the demons that night were in your hearts and minds, not in the sky. I thought we had survived this crisis too, as we have survived so many others. But in the days that followed, our war leader, Bahim, cunningly stirred your fears again. It was he who incited you to demand that I go to the gods as a human sacrifice. Let our high priestess herself go before the gods at the next full moon and beg them to take us back into their good favor, he urged. Only our best will do. I knew that his real purpose, unspoken and self-serving, was to be rid of me. I have long thwarted his will to dominate the town council. But I also saw your terror. And when you came to me and pleaded, I thought I saw a way out of my own secret misery. When I said yes to you, I too had an unspoken purpose. Rather than suffer any longer from the cancer that was slowly devouring my body, I chose a swift, clean death from a knife thrust to the heart. I chose to leave you and abandon my struggle with Bahim and his followers. Now I see that this was self-serving on my part. Perhaps I, too, like you, lost my courage. Perhaps this is why my vision failed me. I surely did not foresee what happened next. How quickly some of you allowed the voice of my enemy, Bahim, to seduce you further. Instead of pulling together, as I have taught you, you gave in to your fears once again and let him turn you against each other. In your distress, you even listened to those who declared that we must turn time backward and leave our farms to return to our smaller tribes and our old foraging ways. You listened to those who would tell a 6-year-old to go back to suckling at her mother's breast. Then you listened when Bahim made me the scapegoat for all that has gone amiss in recent years. More and more of you blamed me for leading you on a false path. When the brutal men of Bahim's warband seized me and abused my body for 3 days in the public square, none of you tried to stop them. Some of you joined them. Others of you, horrified though you were, enjoyed watching what they did to me. My terror for you runs as deep as my anguish for myself. Few of you can see the unclean spirits that you have drawn to yourself, but they are with you even now. By the deeds of these last days, you have cursed and degraded yourselves for a long, long time to come. My people, what will become of you? None of the men who were beating me meant to kill me. They'd meant me to live 2 more days until the next full moon. Bahim knew better than to deprive you of the promised thrill of a human sacrifice. And you, in your innocence, most of you still thought my ceremonial death would win you back the gods' favor. When Goran struck the blow that broke my rib, he was more horrified than anyone else. When my rib snapped and its jagged edge pierced my lung, and all the muscles of my torso clenched in spasm, and my breath stopped, and my spirit leaped out of agony into the light. It's hard to go on even in thought. My spirit weeps as I remember how eagerly I entered the tunnel that opened before me, how grateful I was to die. My people, I wish I could tell you this. We are so much more alive outside our earthly bodies than in them. I wish I could tell you. But then, if we knew, none of us would want to stay in our bodies at all. Maybe that is why, under the wisdom of the gods who guide us, we forget our true glory while we dwell on the earth, our mother, in these vessels of clay. I gather my courage and continue, struggling to shape in words the wonder that awaited me on the far side of that tunnel, the garden of the gods, the ringing radiance. Even the grass and flowers there are made of light and of music and fragrance too. How can I describe trees that are as vast as hills, yet delicate as gossamer, or living cascades that sing with the voice of many waters? How can I name colors beyond those our earthly eyes can see? On a terrace, ringed by fountains of nectar that filled the space with bliss, I was received by beings of light. Mighty as they are, and puny and flawed as I am, they greeted me with tenderness and with absolute, unconditional love. Their cleansing light washed through me. I knelt in spirit and submitted to its scouring. In the face of such acceptance, there is no place to hide anything, least of all the rage and horror that were reverberating throughout my body of light. The jagged shards of my rage sliced through me like knives as the gods drew them forth from me. An agony greater than any I had yet known. It took an utmost effort of will to release my darkness into those searching hands, but the pain passed. In a moment, it seemed. And then I was at peace in the presence of these glorious beings. So it was, in truth, more their doing than mine, that after your betrayal and 3 days of torment at your hands, I did not ask the gods for vengeance or even for justice. In that garden of light, I asked those beings of light to forgive what you had done to your high priestess. Then I recited to them your prayers for mercy exactly as you had begged of me before Bahim turned you against me. The gods had to help me with this too. They reached out and helped me with their strength ere I finished, or I would not have made it through. When I finished, everything around me had become even lovelier. A golden mist now filled the terrace with a sweetness I could taste and feel as well as see. It was joy, joy bursting forth from these godly beings. They were that pleased with my feeble effort to forgive. They used no words at all, but a pure, shaped essence of meaning that is impossible to mistake. It flowed into my understanding in swirls of shimmering music. In human words, what they said to me might run thus. You have opened the way for us to show you our hopes for your people. When you have seen what you are about to see and have understood the choice that lies before them, you will be given a choice of your own. You may remain here with us, or you may return to your earthly body and there complete the ceremony you and your people have planned for the next full moon, and then return to us. A veil seemed to lift. Off to my right, I saw a lane of majestic trees like nothing on earth. Between the trees floated a row of exquisite shimmering globes, each one larger than my own body of light. At the invitation of the gods, I approached the first globe. Vividly in my mind's eye, I see again the images therein. Humans roaming the earth in small bands, clad in furs and coarsely woven garments of grasses. Even now, as I lie here, once again in my earthly body, my every breath a struggle, the images in that globe seem more real to me than my own flesh. My understanding expanded as I gazed. I knew this globe to be showing me the first age of humanity, when we lived much like our animal brethren, but with fire and simple tools. How uncountably many years we lived this way. But even as primitive as we are in this era, we already have something beyond any other creatures. Images arise in our minds, and we have words for these images, few and simple in the beginning, but with our spoken words, we can act in packs as never before. And more, we can imagine and make new tools that befit new environments. Sometimes we even trade our goods with other tribes. We are more adaptable than any other beings, even our near human cousins. I watched for what seemed a long time, fascinated at the fierce primal joys and pains of our days and the terrors of the nights we spent close huddled around our fires. Each one of these 6 globes was to show me another age of humanity. This lay clear in my understanding as I moved on from the first to the second. Yet for a while, the moving images here seemed no different. Humans are still foraging on the face of the earth. But as we spread far and wide in our small bands, changes come more rapidly. As the years pass, we make ever more elaborate tools and weapons and garments and dwellings. In this second era, we are becoming self-aware, though at first we do not realize it. Our keen sense of subtle energies has until now always been fused with our inner imaginative life. In the spirit life that speaks to us from every rock and bush and bend in the river, we also see our own sentience reflected back to us. Our dreams and imaginings have always mixed fluidly and interchangeably with our psychic senses and with our bodily senses as well. Now we are beginning to distinguish between them. Our wisest leaders, our shamans, help us live and move in this sometimes wondrous, sometimes terrifying world of spirit matter. And we are using language in more complex ways than before. In this second age of humanity, we begin to see patterns and to seek meaning in them by way of stories. We see patterns in the stars, and we tell stories about them to each other. We make stories about the living spirits we sense in everything. We see our world as filled with magic and beauty, and so we create art and music. We tell stories about our origins. We bury our dead with rituals and prayers. My people, this is the life way many of us knew in our own childhoods and youths before we settled into these new farming towns. But at least 4 more globes awaited me beyond this one, maybe 5. What would the gods show me in these? I seethed with eagerness to find out. When I moved on to the 3rd globe, I saw vast numbers farming on a scale so immense I was staggered. How far the spread of farming can take us if we follow our new gods into this new era. You will find this hard to believe, but I see great wild beasts tamed and harnessed to till our fields and carry our burdens. Humanity multiplies and spreads like never before. Larger towns appear, then splendid stone cities. It is as if the earth, our mother herself, is rising up and taking new shapes to shelter these new societies. So many styles of craft and culture. So many songs and stories. In this 3rd era of humanity, we are becoming aware of our own capacities. But just as with our sentience, at first we do not understand that these capacities are innate in us. For a long while we see them reflected back to us in our stories of gods and goddesses. By invoking our gods in prayer, we are learning to call up our own powers in a deliberate act of will. My heart smiles to see how the rituals that we create in the God's honor will help us gain further control of our impulses and abilities. This enables us to live and work close-packed in ever larger communities. I watch as diverse tribes come together into larger groups. City-states arise, and then, as millennia pass, great empires. Goods and ideas will be traded far and wide, even as terrible new diseases strike in the crowded cities and spread along trade routes. Fewer adults die of violence or hunger or exposure. More young children die, but of those who live to grow up, more live to grow old. While I see much in this third globe that makes me rejoice, there is also much darkness along with the light. Primitive savageries lessen in this era, yet many brutalities are only increasing. I see great warlords protect their peoples from random violence, but their rule is often oppressive. Some are far worse than Bahim. Fighting is less frequent, but wars are much larger in scale. Most horrible of all, slavery becomes common. Still, in spite of the brutalities, some people are living longer and some better than before. The new songs and stories give meaning to the lives of the men and women of these times, and sometimes joy. The fourth globe, when I place my eager attention there, shows great stone cities so huge they stun my mind. Around them stretch cultivated fields beyond reckoning. Written language is mastered, then metalwork in bronze and iron, then coinage. To human and animal power we add wind and water power. How vastly these enhance the works of the human mind and spirit. The new advances are inner as well as outer. Ever more individuals reach great heights of spiritual realization on the high ranges of truth. A few dare to share their inner treasures with the masses. Great religions take shape. At the same time, more and more of the people become aware of an innate sense of moral law. This they project onto their new divinities. The new religions spread far and wide. Side by side with the moral codes fostered by these new religions, the empires bring forth codes of civil law. At their best, they bring in a new order that advances civilization to another level. Whole new forms of family, polity, and society arise. Ever greater cities and ever greater civilizations spread across the planet. But the price paid for this move from brute force into law is also very high. Literacy spreads, but as it does, the openness to subtle energies that we'd all known in the dawn of humanity fades even further from our collective awareness. My heart weeps as I see the foraging peoples dying out wherever the great civilizations touch them. Wars rage on a scale Bahim could never imagine. Driven by the shadow side of these new religions, people persecute each other in the name of their single gods. Women are subjugated instead of respected. Slavery and oppression spread even more widely than before. The visions in the fifth globe are stranger yet, but I can still make some sense of them. Here are cities like crystal clusters as huge as hills. Inconceivable numbers of people live in them. Deep thinkers are discovering some of the spiritual laws that govern the natural world. We use our new grasp of natural law to amazing effect. steam, then bitumen, then even lightning are harnessed to put vast power in the hands of ordinary folk. Unliving devices carry people and goods everywhere, almost effortlessly, even through the air. In this era, the worst of the brutalities begin to decrease. Slavery largely vanishes from the earth. I rejoice to see most children born alive living to grow up, and most who grow up live to grow old. Astonishing. And just as wonderful, we begin to reach out to each other through subtle devices that let us speak instantly over great distances. Some societies are even beginning to take responsibility again for the well-being of each and every member. But side by side with incredible prosperity among some of the Earth's peoples, others are trapped in poverty and misery. We wield weapons of godly power while our wisdom is still all too human. War is less frequent, but when it happens, it is devastating on a scale unthinkable in earlier ages. And the great wild places of the earth are beginning to sicken. The sixth globe shows me networks of fairy lights all over the planet, brighter than the stars at night. I gape at the sheer beauty of it. Vast knowledge is available to vast numbers of people. Many are using this to improve the material quality of life for more and more of the populace at an ever faster pace. Even better, more of the brutalities are being overcome. While much remains to be done, ideals such as tolerance, fairness, justice, and well-being for everyone begin to spread globally like never before. New forms of spirituality overflow the vessels of tradition and flourish in spite of widespread cynicism. And here is the greatest wonder of all. Among the countless marvels I am witnessing, this is the one that makes my heart sing with joy. In this age, I see the multitudes finally beginning to understand what only a few have seen before this. We all, everyone, everywhere, really are one tribe, one people, one family, sharing one life on this beautiful oasis in space. This new mutation of consciousness, like the ones in earlier eras, spreads slowly at first, then begins shaping entire cultures. But as before, as ever before, the cost for these advances is high. With great effort, we have pulled back our aggressions into smaller, less devastating wars, but war there still is. Dire poverty lessens rapidly, even as I watch, but it is still widespread with its ghastly toll of suffering. And even while poverty is lessening, and increasing numbers of people have an ever higher quality of life, human population is mushrooming as never before. There are suddenly so many of us, and we have harnessed so much of the natural world to our uses that we are affecting the entire web of life, even to the very climate. The need to address these problems globally is dire. Yet some self-serving leaders are still able, like Bahim, to exploit the fears of the people in dark, destructive regimes that preach hate and suspicion instead of tolerance and unity. Such regimes pull us apart and take us backward at a time when more urgently than ever before, we need to move forward together. Are we learning fast enough? Will we suffocate the web of life upon the earth, our mother, and with it ourselves? The seventh globe was yet harder for me to see, but here were marvels even stranger than before. Some of the cities are becoming as beautiful as forests. No, now some of the cities are beautiful forests. The buildings are immense trees, grown under conscious control by those skilled in such crafts. The great city centers are now living, garden-filled wonderlands that tower as tall as mountains. As they grow, they draw dangerous vapors out of the air and cleanse the atmosphere. They harvest sunlight and wind for energy. The thousands of millions of people who live in these vast, sky-reaching cities grow so much food in them that we are able to reduce the amount of land under cultivation. The rate of human population growth slows and stabilizes and begins to decrease as all women everywhere gain full control of their own lives and bodies and fertility. In this age of humanity, dire poverty is finally abolished from the earth. So much is done by unliving devices that many of us can devote the work of our days less to life's necessities and more to health and sports and culture and learning and caring for each other. After several disasters, we finally harness our will and slow the heating of the planet to a pace that averts all-out catastrophe. Bitumen-based energy is replaced by cleaner means that I cannot grasp even with my expanded understanding. Easier for me to see is how we also plant vast numbers of trees to reforest the planet and draw ever more of the dangerous vapors out of the air. As the pace of new learning and new skills continues to increase, we grow wiser and more skillful in our use of resources. The natural world begins to recover, slowly at first, then more quickly. Even as population growth slows and gently reverses, populations continue to withdraw from the countrysides to concentrate in the prosperous cities. More and more of the surface of the earth returns to wilderness, meticulously monitored and tended by those who delight in the natural world. Grave challenges still arise, but as they do, I see them being managed by means of new skills and crafts that arise to meet them. A decent quality of life for each and every human becomes sustainable within a healthy life web upon the earth, our mother. And in this era, ever larger numbers of men and women are reaching advanced states of consciousness. We grow in wisdom, insight, and compassion. More and more of us begin to grasp how deeply we are all interconnected with everyone and everything at every level. As in the previous eras, this new awareness filters through to shape entire culture. Life becomes beautiful and meaningful for more and more of us. As the natural world renews itself, the awareness of subtle energies that we all had in our earliest days reawakens in more and more of us. As it does, we also find that some regions of the world have preserved this ancient wisdom for us all. This ancient wisdom joins and strengthens the forms of spirituality that arise later. Together, they blossom into many beautiful life ways. Our subtle communication devices grow more powerful. They connect us on an ever-growing scale. We reach out and form interlinked clusters with each other in a neural network that swiftly spans the planet. I watch, entranced, as humanity itself becomes a brain for the earth, our mother. Suddenly, I feel a jump to an even higher intensity. I'm seeing differently, as if a new dimension is unfolding all around me. I look back along the lines of globes I've already visited and vertigo seizes me. Somehow I am looking straight down upon that first globe at the same time I look out and back at it. How can this be? I struggle in vain to grasp how space shapes itself in this higher dimension. Now I am receiving impressions rather than images. It's a struggle to shape these into any kind of story at all. Here is the best I can do. The seventh globe, in front of which I now float, is showing me a story about a possible seventh age of humanity upon the earth, our mother. But this seventh age is more than just a next new era. This new age begins an entirely new cycle of ages in a new second tier. It will repeat the cycle of the first 6 eras, but on a different level. This is why I'm seeing that first globe below me as well as behind me. And with this, it all begins to make a bit more sense to me. In the 6 globes of that first tier that I've just seen, we humans awaken and craft new modes of awareness and new capacities. This 7th globe begins a whole new second tier in which the earth, our mother herself, will awaken as a conscious being and will likewise grow in complexity of awareness in the same stages as we individual humans do in the first tier. This new second tier planetary consciousness will emerge through us. Humanity does more than become a physical brain for the earth, our mother. Collectively, we carry part of her consciousness too. Nonetheless, we also continue to grow as individuals. Even as more and more of us participate in a planet-wide consciousness, we continue to become ever more fully our unique selves. In this second tier cycle, there will also emerge among ourselves ever new forms of consciousness, culture, science, and society. But in every one of those globes that I have seen in the first tier, shadows darkened even as the lights brightened. Such shadows seem to reach far into this second tier also. Maybe it must be so in every age. While we live on earth in these bodies of clay, we must cast a shadow whenever we stand in the light. The earth, our mother herself, casts a shadow as she did at the blood moon that hurled me into horrors. And with that thought, a terrible tremor shook me to my core. Might the shadows that emerge in this new second tier be even worse than those in the first? I looked searchingly to see, but the globes had all emptied. This contraction of fear had closed my vision. I didn't want to stop. There were more globes in the second tier, and I glimpsed even more tiers beyond that. But when I strained to see further, it all dissolved into blinding light. Then the vision changed abruptly. Now there was only one globe directly in front of me. In it, I saw only one image, a toddler. It was standing, but wobbling back and forth, struggling to take its next step. It was either going to take that step forward very soon or fall down hard backwards. I knew at once that this toddler stands for you, my people. Time seemed to expand as I pondered this image, and insights unfolded further in my mind. This toddler may fall down hard now, but nonetheless, it will learn to walk as long as it keeps trying. Humanity will eventually make it into its next stage. Of course it will. Evolution is one of the great natural laws that drive manifestation. I'd seen that clearly in the 5th globe. Occasional backslidings are mere ephemeral eddies in the great river of time. And for so long as we are embodied in these vessels of clay, time flows in one direction and one direction only, onward into ever greater complexity. So, in the larger scheme of the highest gods, it is not so very important whether this particular wobbling toddler, you, my people, whether you succeed in taking this next step now. If you do not break through to the next new era, sooner or later some others will. As soon as I grasped this, everything changed again. The globes and garden and the gods all vanished. I seemed to be back in my earthly body, but long ago, during my childhood, when my shaman teacher took me to the high mountains to watch trout struggle upstream to spawn. I seemed to be again in my 8-year-old body, by the same cascading stream, standing on the same glistening boulder, holding onto the same overhanging fir tree, its bark rough and sticky with sap under my hands. Breathlessly, I watched a trout gather itself for its great leap up to the next pool, just as I'd watched it in my childhood. But this time, in the lower pool, I also saw, as if in one of those globes of vision, the foraging tribe of my early childhood. Then I looked at the upper pool, so large and inviting. There, under its surface, I saw our town, but I saw it as it might be in years to come. Ripe, heavy grain stood ready for harvest in the very fields that you, my people, had only just begun to mark out when the blood moon changed everything. Insights unfolded further in my mind as I watched that trout circle in the lower pool, gathering its strength. If it fails this leap for the upper pool and falls back, it will be bruised and exhausted. It might not be able to try for the upper pool again for a long time. The meaning behind this vision given me by the gods shone clear in my mind. My people, if in your fear your shadow side prevails now, then you will fall back hard. Your debasement under Batumavir will take you far into darkness and suffering for a long time to come. The trout leaped. It landed slap across the lip of the upper pool, struggling with all its might against the downrushing current. Fast as thought, I reached out in urgent desire to nudge this trout up into the next pool. Slam! And I was back in my earthly body again, in an explosion of lurid pain. The gods had granted me the choice I'd made in will, though not in words. My chest muscles had relaxed from spasm, enough to let me draw breath again. By your time, I'd been out of my body only briefly. I have since learned that during those 3 days of outrage against me, you who remained my friends and allies had been gathering strength too, much like that trout circling in the lower pool. I am told that when I collapsed unbreathing at Goran's blow, some of you rose and faced down Bahim's gang. Then, when my body began breathing again, everyone backed off. I thank the gods that it did not come to a fight among you, and I thank the gods for the care with which you, my friends, claimed my body and carried me here to safety, and are tending me now with such loving kindness. In spite of crushing pain at every breath, I rest peacefully, taking joy in your company. But the clash of wills in this town is not resolved. An uneasy truce holds between the factions. A third of you wish Batumavir to rise up and overthrow the town council and seize control. You who are of this mind believe you will prosper under the rule of this one strong man. You are deluded. As soon as Bahim has no further use for you, he will discard you too, as he discarded me long ago. At least it seems likely that I will live long enough to die again 2 days from now. No one of any faction is going to make a move until all can see what omens the gods send at my ceremonial death. If you only knew how gladly I will go to it. The healers have done what they can for me, but everything hurts. Breathing hurts most of all. Returning to this body was a far greater sacrifice than leaving it again will be. I could have stayed in that bliss-filled garden. I came back to you because I want you to understand this, my people. Your bright future is not yet lost to you. You can still claim it if you hold to your courage and go forward together. How much of wonder lies ahead of you if you go this way? Or if you give way to your fears again and break apart into your former, smaller tribes, you will fall backwards. You will go down the darker path that befits the darkness of your recent deeds. How much suffering awaits you if you go this way? But the body to which I have returned is so broken, I cannot tell you any of this. Even if there were words or images in our earth-bound language to share what I have seen, I can barely draw breath enough to whisper a word or two at a time. I am unable to tell you how much the gods love you, how much they wish blessings for you, how much they hope you will choose the brighter path. They will love you beyond your understanding, no matter what course you take, but they will not choose for you. Or perhaps they cannot. And I cannot warn you about the choice before you. Of all the agonies I have suffered, this is the one that shatters my heart. I do the only thing left. Though every breath I take is an act of will in the face of brutal pain, I set myself to keep breathing for 2 more days. When the next full moon rises, you will see me go willingly to my sacred death. Maybe by this you will know yourselves to be forgiven, to be blessed by the gods. Maybe this will help you claim your courage and move forward. Yes, forward even as you hold on to the best of the old ways and bring them with you. And if I must remain silent outwardly, at least I can still speak in my mind the story of the visions given me by the gods. I pray that some of you, or at least one of you, can catch in your dreams this story I am telling over and over again in my spirit. May you take courage in these dark times and move forward together into your bright future. My people, how much I love you, how much the gods love you. I pray that you may be blessed now and forever. Okay, that's back. Wow, 23 of you stuck it out. I'm amazed. That's stamina, folks.
I would be willing to bet that some of us have had similar visions.
I would be willing to bet that too. We need to tell some beautiful stories about our future, about possible futures. There is so much dystopian fiction out there. We need to tell beautiful stories about our futures. Yeah, that's my passion. What's possible?
Yes, because we create those stories as self-fulfilling prophecies.
Yes.
A futurist by the name of Fred Pollack actually turned historian and looked back at historical people's images of the future
Mm-hmm.
and asked, well, what happened? They came true. How you imagine the future will be is how you bring it, how it comes to be.
Yes. And that's why what we're doing in these Gebser societies, the integral, meta-modern, game B, etc., it is so important with whatever our little capacities are, that we bring our little dish to the great potluck of creating the future. So I'm looking at the chat. Sounds aw. Thank you, Jijun, Dave, Danny, Jesse. Yes, that was an experiment. It's I started with the trying to embody the ages from the point of view of the priestess, and then I decided to put a narrative frame around it to give it some narrative oomph. So I kind of borrowed the story from my integral novel in progress and adapted it and extremely condensed it and packed it around the core vision of the globes. And then it took on a life of its own, like creative projects do, and kind of went in directions I didn't imagine.
So this is the mythic emerging
Yes.
in its new form.
When it was
Barbara
brand new.
Marx, yeah, Barbara Marx Hubbard, and others since them. Oh, what's his name? It starts with an E. Talk about needing a new story and writing a new story.
Yeah.
And you know, right now we're in a story of bigger is better, and you know, various gods of money whom we serve, um, and what does an integral story look like if that is our new story?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Let's tell some integral stories. And yes, I'm reading the comments. I do imagine this. You know, I thought this was just going to be an exercise for me to articulate my own ideas. But now I'm starting to imagine once we can gather in person again, I would love to do this in person because I'm an old dancer and it's like embodying it. And this was one of the emphasis in our previous two presentations, that an integral spirituality is an embodied spirituality. And that includes the erotic, the sexual. I mean, nothing, we can't leave any part of us out. And the traditional religions have tended to want to get us out of the body, but to bring it back into the body and to do it embodied and to actually kind of almost dance it, just somatize it as I'm speaking it. And I can imagine with dancers, I would love to meet some dancers and just dance. How did people dance in the magic era? How did people dance in the mythic? Find some appropriate music and just move and get it in our bodies, get it in our muscles and our nervous systems. So I'm looking forward to getting together with folks like you when we can and dancing together too. You know, it's so disembodied. I mean, it's so wonderful to be meeting this way via Zoom. So much is possible, but it's not embodied, which is so, you know, so it's like this yearning is building up to be embodied again. And maybe that's part of Gaia moving us through into the next stage.
Thank you, Karen. As some of the other mutant participants were saying, it gets better every time. So I really, really appreciate it. And I'm so grateful you're able to present your work here amongst colleagues and peers and artists. And I totally agree with them that an embodied dramaturgical performance of this, an exploration of this is certainly something we're all desiring. And as we've been talking about, you know, I think part of this is I've been playing around with this in my recent writing, calling it a mutational urgency. I think creativity is how this mutational urgency shows up. We want to make together. We want to body forth the new mutation. Hence the name of this day for the conference, New Mutations of Consciousness, right? How do new mutations show up? They show up in art, storytelling, poetry, playing around with different shapes of stories and different shapes of time. You know, this is the way our consciousness embodies something and bodies it forth into the world. So I am just grateful for your presence here and also anticipating latently, prefiguratively, when we can come together and experience this together in person. Hopefully sooner than later, but I trust the unfoldment of events being what they are. But thank you, Karen.
Thank you for the opportunity to share this and to be present for the other presentations and just to be in our we space, the energy field we create by being together consciously.
I would speak to the energy flows indeed. Jung always emphasized energy flows and how the energy is flowing. And yes, let it be so. Multimodal art forms, exploring every emerging possibility. Let it be so.
Let it be so. And so many new art forms become possible with our new digital IT technology.
You betcha. You betcha. Yeah. And the ability to share, to join together like we are now. I mean, there's no going back. The ability to connect in these dimensionally,
yes,
temporally.
And it's ironic too, you know, as I've spent this last year and a half on Zoom, that episode in Jung's Memories, Dreams, Reflections, when Jung had his heart attack and was bedridden I think he was in his 70s, and he had those incredible, very high visionaries, very high spiritual experiences while he was out of his body at night, and then he'd have to be back in his suffering body during the day. And he'd go back and forth for over a week, I think. And he said, it was always such a horror. It was so distressing having to come back into his body and he could, oh no, now I have to go back to the box system because after being in this amentional transcendent state during the nights, and to come back to his body, he called it, I haven't memorized that, but it's like when we're in our bodies, we're all in these little boxes stacked in a row. We're all isolated in these little boxes. And during one of the integral get-togethers, I was laughing because I was looking at the row of boxes of the people on the Zoom chat. So we're in the box system. We're in Jung's box system. So, but it's a good thing because the ways we can connect now. I mean, the way we're connecting with each other. I mean, I really see humanity, Homo sapiens, as we are now forming a prefrontal cortex for Gaia. We are Gaia's prefrontal cortex. It's like, wow. And I mean, the images that come, the things that come up through us, through our algorithms on YouTube and so on, is this the subconscious of Gaia starting to come forth in images? That's kind of terrifying. I feel rather urgent about those of us who are in these integral communities starting to put our beautiful stories about the possible future out there to start shaping the larger culture. But these mutational changes have always happened like this, and this is one of my shticks. I break down Gebser's mental stage into 3 sub-stages, and that's why I had 6 instead of 4 eras. But every time there's been a mutational change, it's happened in a way like it's happening now. We're going through number 7. So we've seen this movie before. There will be a next emergent era. What we can do for our part is to let the transition be kinder rather than harsher. Because in human systems, in human societies, these changes tend to be dark ages. And let's use what we can know and can do to mitigate the suffering and get us through this dark time as gently as we can and make the new era as beautiful as we can. I think it's important that all of us are contributing in whatever little way we can.
I was going to mention as well, I don't know if folks are listening to or watching the new Apple Foundation science fiction adaptation. But speaking of stories, it's interesting how it's so present in the mutational theme is actually present in the Foundation story, at least how Apple. I haven't actually read Asimov's book, I admit, blasphemy. But what's interesting, there is a really interesting line where essentially they're going, we know we're in this restructuration period and the empire wants to last forever, but that's not going to happen. That's not reality. So what we can do is soften the fall. How do we soften the fall? How do we mitigate and minimize suffering of all beings as much as possible, and without getting grandiose about it too, right? Like Sam in The Lord of the Rings, where he puts on Frodo's ring in the book for a moment to navigating the orcs of towards the end of the book, and he has this vision, right, of saving Middle Earth and having this grandiose garden where he's like growing green things across the whole realm. So of course Sam has this beautifully innocent vision of his own empowerment, but we can't get grandiose about it either. So there's this really precious middle space that we're kind of in here of like, what do we do? How do we catalyze? How do we help? How do we soften the fall? And I do think one of the best things is, as you're illustrating, Karen, is telling stories and working with the imagination, intensifying the presence of this mutation in ways that allow however it's going to crystallize, and to coalesce. But
it's okay that you haven't read the book, Jeremy, because neither did the producers of the new show. But and I'm enjoying the show. But it's a really interesting thing. I mean, I first read Foundation as a kid, and it originally ran as a serial. So the first book is actually a lot of short stories and it's been hard to make into a screenplay because there's not a singular narrative that has a singular protagonist or even a singular antagonist. It takes place over hundreds of years. But Asimov was a scientist, and it's interesting because the way that he's going to cushion the blow, right? The way that he's going to shorten this 30,000 year dark ages to 1,000 years is through math. I mean, it's a very mental, rational approach to this, that Asimov, the storyteller, was still Asimov, the scientist, right? And so the way that he's going to mitigate this awful period. But what's interesting about this, I think, and I think that Karen will probably have something to say about this, is that he writes in a mutant, right? That there's a character that's a mutant. I mean, it's almost, it's not almost, it's a personification of mutation.
Right, the mule.
The mule, absolutely. And owing to the fact that the producers either didn't read or didn't understand the books, one of the protagonists in the series seems to be a mutant that wasn't in the books. And so it's interesting to me, though, because here's a guy who's steeped in the mental rational, but is trying to reach into other areas of consciousness as a storyteller. But his principal method of dealing with this is a deficient mental rational approach within the story. It's a really interesting, and complicated thing to think about.
yeah, Dave, I'll just say I'm in agreement. I don't know about the math part either. I was kind of like, oh, that's it. All right. I don't know about that. I don't know if things can be so clear and pristine in that kind of rational way. But yeah. And yet he can't help himself, right? That, as you're saying, that kind of mutational theme creeps into the work in spite of himself, in spite of the conscious. William Irwin Thompson has this line about, and sorry, I know we probably want to wrap it up, but just wanted to kind of point on this note, this poetic, artistic, creative storytelling note, where we seem to be concluding our first session on, that there's this relationship between our being and our knowing, right? That the stories we tell actually reveal more of our own being, right, in terms of this ontological mutative shift than our conscious knowing might prescribe, might say. So even if we are mental rational storytellers or mental rational participants in this culture, we are telling more than we know, right? And we are relating to being through the imagination in ways that are folks like us, maybe, who are more sensitive to this, more trained to pay attention to this, might be able to tease out of different stories and perhaps intensify in our own creative work. So yeah, wonderful. Let me pass the ball to, I don't know, Lisa or John. Take us to the next phase, or
I want to speak on behalf of mathematics, being the poet that I am with extremely limited capacities in anything mathematical. However, I love that boundary line of mathematics where you walk through the very membranes, and so thus imaginary numbers, hyper
Irrational
numbers,
numbers.
and topology, which always leads me to bring in our dear friend Stephen Rosen and his work with phenomenological topology and Kleinian surfaces, so that there are openings, and certainly with Jung and the physicist Wolfgang Pauli, there are very profound adventures that are also imaginative. And as I was enjoying the images in your presentation, Karen, I was traveling in many fractal dimensions and thinking of active imagination. But then, as you say, and I'll just go right back here to loop back around to movement, authentic movement, and ways that we can experience our embodiments. I do in this latest riff. Our ability to communicate is the most important opening, as I see it, is that whatever is happening to us, and whatever we are making happening, and whatever we must let happen, being able to communicate together in genuine dialogue. Mike Purdy is very much into the listening studies. There are some societies there. Mike is going to be presenting to our local Monterey Jung group a bit later on listening. There's an international group working with listening. David Boehm's work with dialogue. This is where the energy is going. I feel that's how I feel the energy, and with our gathering right here and all the energies that everyone participating today is bringing to being here, and trusting this process. I'm just deeply grateful, and thank you, Karen, for your wonderful imagining. And I had lots of wonderful experiences traveling around with you.
Jeremy, before we go, do you just want to whet our appetite for next Saturday?
Sure. Yes. So we're going to be convening at the same time. Speaking of time, in terms of clock time, it will be the same. And next weekend, I'm just so looking forward to it as well. It's Algis McCunis will be presenting new work. There will be a series of discussions and I think panel discussions in terms of responses to Algis. We're going to be doing some Q&A as well. And then in the afternoon, at least for the afternoon for me, I believe Eric Kramer will be also responding. And then I think we're going to conclude with the formal presentations with Glenn Parry talking about original thinking and original politics. But stay tuned, because I've been getting some back channel messages and some coalescing of kind of really interesting artistic and maybe even one more panel discussion. So Lisa, I'll be in contact with you about that as a kind of the mutations contribution to the afternoon sessions. So should be really wonderful. Looking forward to seeing you all then, and we will be sending out a reminder email on this Friday, this coming Friday. So you all have the link once again. And it'll be a different link, I believe, Lisa.
Oh, same link.
Oh, same link. Okay. Ignore what I just said. So same link then. You've got it already, but we'll send the reminder anyway.
I would just to express again, this is the emergence of the Gebser Society. It will not be the way it was. It will be through this way and onward. And I'm, again, grateful for that. Grateful for that.
Yeah, me too, John. I want to maybe emphasize next week, it will be an excellent way to kind of presentiate the past, our origins, right? I mean, Algis and his contributions, some of the longtime Gebser Society members will be participating and engaging. So they'll be really bringing that forward right now as we're mutating into something new, is going to be wonderful. And then that following weekend, the last concluding weekend, just to have Rudolf Hammerly present talking about Gebser's life and archives, and Aaron Cheek, who's presently doing translation work into, so there's some works coming into English. So really excited for that. So kind of talking about the future too, in terms of Gebser projects. And then all of us will see how this coalesces as we go along after this month. But
on weekend 3 also, just to note, we are aiming to conclude with some poetry. We have a containment of some poems. Aaron Cheek will be presenting some of Gebser's poems that he has translated, that Aaron has translated. We have a soundscape production, and Gebser conferences have often included performance art and multimedia presentations, which is wonderful. And Sabrina Delaval has sent along a brief, strong, and wonderful media piece, and then Dave Zuckerman has connected us with the poet Michael Love, and we will have Michael Love's poem also. And that's week number 3. So that's 2 weeks from